Welcome to the Authentic Self-Revolution. I'm Carly, your guide on this journey to genuine living and the real wealth of freedom and fulfillment. In a world that just loves to tell us who we should be, we're here to remember who we truly are. We're here for the questioners, the misfits, and anyone who's ever felt there must be more to life than following the script. Together, we explore what it means to revolutionize your life by living it on your terms. Each week, we peel back the layers of shoulds and musts and dive into practical ways to live more authentically. If you're listening only and you want to see my face, you can head over to my YouTube channel, Owning Authenticity, where you'll find this podcast along with a treasure trove of other content aimed at uncovering who you truly are. Your authentic self is waiting. Let's dive in. In today's episode, we are talking about 5 repeatable steps to climb higher in your truth. Okay, we are also taking a laid back approach to today's episode as this is the tail end of my energy wave of hosting the Authentic Self Uprising last week. If you were there, I'd love to hear from you in the comments and share a little bit about how your experience was. And if you missed it, or if you're finding this episode at any point in the future, please know that you can visit owningauthenticity.com/uprising, and you can still gain access to all of the magic that was unlocked at the event last week and basically go through it at your own pace using the replays and the workbook. The exercises are yours to keep. The replays you get lifetime access to. Again, just visit owningauthenticity.com/uprising to join in on the fun that was had. It's basically still happening. Okay. And I want to talk about what we shared in the uprising. And basically it was these 5 repeatable steps. And I want to start by kind of tying into a theme that we've already talked about here on the podcast before, especially with the episode about the never-ending story of authenticity and how it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Authenticity is not a binary variable or like a black and white yes or no, 1 or 0, like either you're authentic or you're not. And it is so much more like a never-ending spectrum of you can get more and more and more and more and more authentic as long as you're alive. So if you're still alive, there are more pieces of you that are waiting, ready and waiting to be integrated, to be welcomed home, to be connected with, have a relationship formed with, and to unlock the wisdom, energy, and gifts that those pieces are holding, right? What this means is that if we are still approaching our most authentic self, which my theory is that if we're alive, that is always the case, that there's always more authenticity to have, and that means that no matter what your age, there are more gifts that you possess that you haven't tapped into yet. And claiming your gifts, sharing your gifts is just one step along the process. And I want to just go ahead and get this part out of the way. We don't claim our gifts and share our gifts because we owe it to someone or we're trying to save the world, so to speak, or fix the world. The world is not broken. The world does not need to be saved. The world is just fine. We claim our gifts, we share our gifts because it is exhilarating to do so. Sharing your gifts is the fastest way to unlock your own life force energy. And when we're talking about these new gifts, this new authenticity that brings with it new gifts, that unlocks life force energy, basically what I'm saying is that the flow of life force energy that you're currently experiencing could be bigger, right? And so if you want that, if you want a bigger flow of life force energy, that is why you would head over to the Authentic Self Uprising and go into the deep dives of these 5 repeatable steps. This episode is going to give you a really good idea of what those 5 steps are and the gist of them, but going into an hour on each step and a guided meditation and an exercise, at least one exercise on each step, it walks you from beginning to action. And so let's dive into these steps and give just a little taste of what each of them are. And so step number 1 is unmask yourself. Unmask. And really, like I say in the event, we're going to start with the simple and we're going to drill down into how it really works, okay? Because like you see something on the surface and that's maybe 1%. That's maybe 1% of 1% of what's actually going on. And ditch the mask is the 1% of the 1% of what we're really talking about here, okay? So go with me here. When I say ditch the mask, again, it sounds like a one and done. And what I hear from people, especially the seasoned folks that are gravitating into my work, the people who have done a lot of healing work on themselves already, they're like, I'm not wearing a mask. I don't wear a mask. I took my mask off a long time ago. And how I explain it in the event is like, we do not only have one face. We are like a diamond that has multiple facets, 100 facets, 200 facets. And every single one of those facets could potentially be wearing a mask. And maybe is wearing more than one mask. Because sometimes you ditch the mask, you take the mask off, and what you reveal is the underlying mask. Sometimes, you know. And so this concept of ditch the mask, it's like one by one by one by one. And really what we're talking about here is letting your truth rise to the surface one little bit more than you've done before. And so day 1 of the event, the goal is that a little bit more truth would rise to the surface. And maybe that's a truth that you've already seen before, especially if you've done a lot of work. Most likely you're not going to be like shocked by what it is that rises to the surface, but more detail, more clarity around that truth and how that truth could be even more integrated into your daily life experience, meaning it would bring even more energy to your daily life experience to allow that truth to come even 1% more online. So especially for those that have done a lot of work already, which is almost always the case for people in my community, we're talking about subtle 1% shifts. And we're talking about what if your days could be 1% more energized? Do you want that? Is that something that's worth figuring out how to unlock 1% more energy? And the whole point of these being repeatable steps is that you would unlock 1% more energy, and then maybe next week or next month you would unlock 1% more energy. And if you did that once a month for 12 months, at the end, you're sitting there with like 5, 6, 7% more energy than you had last year. And if you did that again the following year, you'd have more energy and you'd have more energy, you'd have more energy. Basically shattering this myth of aging and getting older, that like our energy naturally decreases. I think our energy naturally decreases when we give up on ourselves, when we stop trying to grow. Like, it's very much my belief, and you know, everybody is sovereign and everybody gets to believe what they want, but we are either growing or we're dying. And a large portion of the population believes that as you get older, your energy naturally fades and you slip into death. And I don't personally believe that. I feel like I get younger the older I get. I have more fun. I have more energy. I play more the older I get. So if that sounds cool, that's what we're talking about. is unlock this energy by bringing your truth to the surface. And that's day one, is unmask, is just even reveal, like, what is the truth? What is the 1% more truth that has been, offline is maybe the most neutral way to say it. Often when the truth presents itself, we realize we've actually had that sucker locked in a basement somewhere, or even that it's been hiding from us because it was afraid of our own criticism. It was afraid of our own judgment, and it didn't trust us to reveal itself. It knew it would not be welcome. And the most recent parts of my truth that are coming online are in that category. Of I have been judging those pieces, calling them sick and wrong for decades. And so letting it come to the surface is ultimately about softening and accepting self because it is. Letting go of this idea of right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. There only is what is. That doesn't mean that what isn't going to change and evolve and transform. That's almost like the whole point of like bringing more truth to the surface so that you can, instead of repressing, like spending energy to repress that part of self, you stop spending that energy. So there's an energy gain, number one, because we're not spending it on self-suppression of that piece. And number two, that piece itself has creative life force energy that it possesses, that now there's the secondary energy gain. It's very exciting as far as like if you want renewal in your energy field, if you are somebody who walks around like exhausted, this is basically the formula for getting unexhausted, for becoming energized. Okay, so we let the truth rise. And then on day 2, step 2, is that we embrace this part. Okay, like I said, like a lot of my pieces that have come to the surface lately, my old opinion of them was very harsh, very critical. And imagine if you met somebody new for the first time and you took one look at them and said, "You're sick and wrong," and turned around and walked away. I think there's plenty of people running their life like that, like where, yes, they actually do that to people, and we're not really talking about that. We're talking about like how much of a relationship gets formed between you and the thing you just said that to, the thing you just rejected. How much of a relationship is happening now? Basically zero. Okay. And when you have no relationship with something, how likely are you to hand over your energy, to open up and reveal your gifts, to be like, these are my precious treasures. This is my magic. Like to chase after the thing that's calling you sick and wrong and be like, no, take my magic. No, you wouldn't. And so the second step of embrace this part, bring it closer. Bring it inside. Open the door, welcome it inside to your heart space, right? But really just bring it inside, give it a warm place to sit. Does it want a snack? Does it want to tell its story? Does it want to just sit and be together for a moment? Welcome it home. And we're talking about self-love. We're talking about self-acceptance. And again, those concepts can be confusing because it sounds very black and white. It sounds like, well, I love myself. And I would say probably you love a lot of parts of yourself. And most likely, if you're anything like a human being, which every single person listening to this podcast is, you have parts that are conscious And those are the parts that are getting love and acceptance. And you have the parts that are remaining unconscious. And those are the parts that do not qualify for the benefits of being accepted or loved. And so we're talking about making the unconscious conscious. That's day one, step one. And then loving those parts. And the thing about it is like the parts that are remaining unconscious, the parts that we keep locked in a basement, or the parts that are hiding from us, they are often difficult to look at because of the social conditioning that we are carrying, the stories that we have about how we should be, the way we should be. And so we're trying to be that way. And anything that's on the outside of that is the part that has to stay in the unconscious. And so as we start doing this process over and over and over and over again, the deeper into our authentic self we go, the truth that gets revealed is harder and harder and harder to look at. Because the rejection is survival. The rejection of those pieces is self-protection. We are trying to fit in. We are trying to belong to the tribe by rejecting the parts of ourselves that would get us excluded from the tribe. And the saddest part of this whole story is that in order to belong, in order to avoid rejection from others, we are rejecting ourselves. And again, that's a confusing concept because it's like, no, I don't reject myself. I accept myself. I am sure that there are parts of yourself that you accept. And I am sure that there are parts of yourself that you are still rejecting. It is a one tiny facet at a time process. And as long as we are alive, there are more parts that we can accept. There are more parts of our truth to bring to the surface and love. And so that's day 2, is a huge exercise in self-compassion, because we cannot accept what we don't have compassion for. So hearing their story, I love the quote, there is no one on this planet you wouldn't love if you knew their story. And that's not even talking about unconditional love. That's talking about, like, if you just listen to somebody, if you really understood what they've gone through, you would love them. It's inevitable. And so when we reject things, it's because we don't understand them. And taking the time to understand, taking the time to be interested, to listen, to see the value of a thing, compassion is the magic that makes that possible, right? And compassion basically says, you exist, therefore you are worthy of being here. And again, it's kind of sad to say that in today's modern age, like, that's a radical concept, where a lot of people, a lot of us are walking around with this concept of right and wrong, good and bad. We're out there playing judge. And this invitation is very different from that. It's like, you exist, therefore you're worthy of being here. You are. It is. Therefore it's worthy of being accepted. And this is a practice, right? And that's why as we start our journey, the parts that come to the surface are the easiest to accept, because we're building these muscles of self-acceptance. And as we get further and further and further and further and further and further into the journey, the pieces get harder and harder to accept. They require bigger muscles. And so something will only surface when you have the capacity to accept it. And so this entire deepening process is really what we're talking about, is self-acceptance, self-compassion, self-love. Becoming our authentic self is about being able to accept who we are. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's also a heartbreaking thing that, like, this is even that like this is even work that needs to be done. Like a friend was telling me the other day about before her child was born and how she used to lose sleep about how am I going to teach them to love themselves? And that concept is very indicative of where we are in, especially Western culture, at this point in our collective evolution. Because you do not need to teach something to love itself unless it has first learned to hate itself. And self-hatred is always learned. Another way to say all of that in a much simpler way is love is our natural state. We're born loving ourselves. And then other people get involved. And they teach us that actually, no, you don't deserve love because you're being bad. You are bad. You know, this conditioning that gets laid on top of us that divorces us from our natural self-love. So this work is healing that divide. It's bringing us back together with the love that we actually are. I was journaling back and forth with the God of my understanding this morning, and basically, like, your natural state is love. Your natural state is clarity. Like, to even talk about worthiness does a disservice to your natural state. To even try to explain that you are worthy misses the point, because worthy implies that there is such a thing as unworthiness, and all of that is the illusion. That's the illusion of social conditioning, of teaching us that there is a good and there is a bad. Compassion and love brings it back to a point where, like, if it exists, it's worthy of existing. It does exist, period. End of story. And that's a really hard concept for a lot of people to understand, but that's, or accept or digest or whatever. But like, that is a reflection of the size of your compassion muscles. How willing are you to love the unlovable? And the further you get into your authenticity journey, that is the job, is loving the unlovable. But here's where we really take a turn. And this is where, like, you know, the Uprising logo, the U is on the right side of the U, it points up. And that symbol of like go down to come up, like so much is like baked right into the U on the Uprising, okay? Because we dive down into our truth, but then we come back to the surface with gems and magic and gifts that we did not possess before. And so day 3 is all about claiming those gifts. And I loved what somebody said, like I shared this on day 4 of the event, but I love how the first time somebody who has done so much work on themselves, they took one look at the gift inventory exercise and they're like, yeah, I've got that one, and that one, and then threw away the other 25 or whatever is on the list. And by the end of the exercise, they had this breakthrough of like, right, I can have whatever gifts I choose to develop. Okay. Gifts are present. They're like tools in a toolbox. And some of them you've gotten out of the toolbox. I even got to calling it the toy box. Okay. Some of them you've gotten out of the toy box and you've played with hundreds of times, thousands of times. And you are a master of that gift because of the level of practice that you've put into mastering it. Right? Like they say, it takes 10,000 hours to master something. Mastery isn't something you're born with. Talent you are born with, but mastery is built. And this is also where, you know, again, as people age, they stop trying to learn things. And learning things is how we keep ourselves young. It's how you keep your brain flexible and making new neural connections and carving out new pathways in your brain. It's how you keep your brain young. It's how you keep your entire self young. And so this idea that you could be 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, and you've got gifts you haven't even tapped into yet. And some may find that overwhelming. Others may find it inspiring. Right? This journey meets you where you are. And there's a reason that we don't talk about that until day 3. Okay? Because it is such a process of first, just love who you are right now. And that is so much easier said than done. And then expand from there. And it's in that expansion that new life force energy comes online. Okay? When we stop suppressing, that's the first energy gain. When we acknowledge and accept and embrace that new part, there's the second energy gain. And then when we share those gifts, there are, like, the sign that you're sharing your gift is that it costs you a certain amount of energy to do the thing, and that it pays you more energy. So here's our third energy gain, is that we spent a little bit to do it and we got back a lot in return. Okay, as I hosted the event last week, like, I was high from getting to facilitate those sessions because I'm sharing my gifts. I love this, right? The life force energy is just pouring through me. And it was an honor, a privilege, a pleasure to get to be there, to get to do that. Same with doing these podcast episodes. I feel the same way. You know, it costs me some energy. It also gives me a lot more than that. It's an energy giving experience to share your gifts. And so bringing those gifts online and deciding, like, what have you mastered? What are you most excited to develop further? What gifts do you share where you feel the most energized? Day 3 is all about becoming an expert on your gifts, because that is a huge source of more energy, right? I said over and over during the event that, like, you know, a lot of the myths and the illusions that we're breaking are the kind of vibe of, like, once I lose the weight, then I'll go to the gym. Okay. And a lot of people think, like, well, once I feel better, once I've got it all figured out, then I'll share my gifts. And again, it's backwards. It's like sharing your gifts will make you feel better. Period. It'll also bring new clarity. It raises your frequency, which lets you tap into new clarity. And then you have new clarity to, okay, weave that into your gifts. Clarify your values a little bit more. And then go again. And now you have even more energy. Raises your frequency even further, gives you new clarity. Like, sharing your gifts is a life force engine. And this only works if you want to feel better. And that may sound like a funny thing to say, because especially people who don't feel good, they're like, of course I want to feel better. Do you? Are you sure? Because being depressed, being ill, having a chronic illness, having a condition, having a diagnosis has value. And that's, again, another difficult concept to wrap your mind around, especially if you're really hating where you are and wanting something to change and feeling stuck. Bring to the surface the truth of the value of where you are. You know, like, I listened to Kelly Brogan, and she tells about how the diagnosis is validating. It's like, this is part of my identity, because when I finally got that diagnosis, I felt seen. I felt understood. And then transcending the diagnosis is difficult because it's, like, actually part of your identity at that point. And, like, again, this is an important place to say, there is no right or wrong. There is no right or wrong, but it is critically important to understand that you can only feel better when you truly are ready to feel better. And what that means is letting go of anything that is standing in the way of that. Anything that is magnetizing you into your current situation, anything that is standing in the way of you feeling better has got to get out of the way. And often that's why we don't end up feeling better, because we're not ready to give up the thing that we're currently holding. And that's fine, because there's no right or wrong. You're existing, and that means you're worthy of love. You're worthy of existing. That's the end of the story. This process of deepening into your authentic self is about joy, is about vitality and thriving. We're not becoming worthy of love by being our authentic self. We're already that. We're already worthy of love. We're not broken. There's nothing wrong with us. You're doing your thing and you're loved beyond imagination. That's not what the journey is for. The journey is for joyful, exhilarating pleasure. And not everybody wants that. And again, that can be really confusing to understand, especially when you're looking at somebody else's life from the outside, which is why it's important to stay on our side of the street. Do you want it? And if you do, the uprising, those 5 steps, like that's what we're doing. We're unlocking that vitality one step at a time. Step 4, day 4, is take up space. And instantly, the mind jumps to taking up other people's space, saying the thing, telling your truth to other people, getting on a stage and letting people look at you, like these kinds of ideas. And day 4 is all about taking up your own space, taking up your own time, taking up your own attention, spending time every day focused on self, taking up your own space. And that this is the magic that makes everything else make sense. Okay, because if we have a new truth rise to the surface, if we have this epiphany, if we have this new understanding of self-love and self-compassion, if we realize these new gifts, and then we don't spend time nurturing that. Like imagine if you formed a new friendship and you had a beautiful first conversation, okay, just clicking, and it just felt so amazing. This is like a new epiphany, okay? And establish an initial connection, and then don't go back for a month. Don't go back for a year. Forget that that even existed. How, not right or wrong, but how strong is that relationship? How cultivated is that relationship? Not very, not at all, you know? And so day 4, take up space, take up your own space, is about cultivating the relationship with the parts that are coming online, with the new gifts that you want to develop further. It takes time. And taking up your own space is a reflection of your self-worth. How many of your minutes every day do you give to you? Because the only one that is benefited by your solitude, by your cultivation of yourself, the only direct beneficiary is you. Yes, the indirect benefits of you being more in love, you having a higher frequency, these things filter out eventually into every relationship you ever have. But the only person who is exactly in the moment benefited by your solitude is you. And so taking up your own space, it's a mirror of self-worth. The level of solitude that you have in your life, the level of presence that you spend just with you, and how good that feels. Because sometimes we're almost forced into it and it doesn't feel very good. But when we choose it and how it feels, that is a reflection of our self-worth, of our self-love, of our self-acceptance. And day 5, at the end of all of this, day 5 is about authentic action, right? Actually acting from this new awareness with these new gifts, with this new mastery that we have cultivated on purpose, taking action. And the last process we cover is when you have your idea of like what it is that you want to do, and that rung of the ladder feels physically out of reach. I'm reaching for it. I know what I want and I can't reach it. The last process of the uprising is the getting ready process. And I stand by this because there is always an action step that you can take. There is always action from where you are right now, right? The last fallacy that we bust in the uprising is very similar to the earlier ones of like, well, once I lose the weight, then I'll go to the gym. Once I feel ready, then I'll take the action. And readiness is not something that happens to us. Readiness is something we build. That's why the process is called the getting ready process. So if you want to be ready, then build your readiness, right? And the process walks you through how to do that, how to find the step that matches where you are, that will build your readiness one little bit more so that you can take the step that's just barely out of reach. And you're ready for that step because you did the step before that built your readiness. And when you take that second one, it builds your readiness. Now you can reach the step that's just right after that. And when you do that one, it builds your readiness. And now you can reach the step that's right after that. And when you do that for a year, 2 years, 5 years, you are reaching, your readiness is very tall. You're reaching rungs on the ladder that 5 years ago you could only imagine, that you would have called a pipe dream. Pipe dream just means not ready. And not ready isn't a problem because we have the getting ready process. We know how to identify the action step that matches where we are, that will build our readiness a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more until a pipe dream is just the next logical step on the journey. Simple. Building our dream life is actually very simple. The only thing that makes it complicated is not believing that we actually deserve to live that. Not believing that we deserve a joyful, exhilarating, pleasurable existence. Believing that suffering makes sense because I'm actually a piece of shit. Or whatever the story sounds like. That I need to hide under a rock and keep myself as small as possible so that nobody else will find out that I'm actually really bad. I mean, when that's our self-image, living a joyful, pleasurable, exhilarating existence doesn't make sense to us. But when we are ready to live a joyful, exhilarating, pleasurable existence, when we are ready to claim our birthright of love as our natural state, building the dream in the 3D is actually very simple. So that is a taste of the 5-day uprising, of the 5 repeatable steps to climb higher and higher into your truth, to climb higher and higher into your joyful existence. Again, not one where you are becoming worthy of love. That's not the point of the process. But one where you wake up in the morning excited for you to get to be you. How often do you sit in awe of you getting to be you? That is the best drug there is, let me tell you. That level of gratitude and awe at like, this is my life. I get this life. It's what I wish for everyone. And fortunately, I'm not even going to say unfortunately, fortunately, we are all sovereign. Okay, which means the only life I can make as joyful, exhilarating, pleasurable as I possibly can is my own. And we have these beautiful things, these voices where we can express. We have this beautiful technology where I can record myself expressing this. We have this beautiful technology called the internet where I can put this out in the world and other people can connect to it. They can take it in. They can have their own experience with it, which is none of my business. Expressing it is my business. The joy of sharing my gift, the joy of using my voice, that's my business. And I was feeling a little bit tired. Like I said, this is kind of the end of the energy wave. This is the, after putting out a lot of energy into hosting this event. And I feel more energized now than I did when I started recording this episode. Because using my voice is one of my gifts and it makes me feel alive. So we don't wait until we feel really, really good to share our gifts. We share our gifts so that we can feel really, really good. I would love to hear in the comments, if you've been to the Uprising, what did you think? How was it for you? What did you unlock? What was your biggest aha? And same from this episode even, of just even listening to the summarized version of describing these 5 steps. And remember that if you are interested in having your own personal uprising, you can sign up at owningauthenticity.com/uprising, walk through the replays on your own time, at your own pace, in your own little cocoon, do the exercises, and have lifetime access to that mini course, to that mini masterclass of deepening into your authentic self for the joy that it unlocks in your life. That is my gift to you. Okay? Until next time, I do hope that you take such good care of the precious one that you are, and so will I.